episode 13. Let's talk about being a conservative mom. Today, a lot of you will know who I have on. If you don't, then you should. It is the beautiful, the wonderful Sara Gonzales of Blaze TV. Sara, how are you? Introduce yourself to the three people who don't know who you are.
Oh, stop it. Stop it. I appreciate you having me. Yes, I am, as you said, Sara Gonzales. I host Sara Gonzales Unfiltered, very original title, I know, on Blaze TV Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. And I help run a nonprofit protecting children in the state of Texas. So, yeah, we're rocking and rolling over here in the state of Texas.
Awesome. Awesome. And so, how did you, get into this world of politics and being even like a host on Blaze TV and having your own show? Like, how did this all come about?
It's funny. I went through college. I went to university. I went through college very quickly. I was very intent on finishing early. And so I was studying not anything having to do. A lot of people are like, oh, you went to journalism school. No, I didn't. That's probably why I'm good at my job because I
Yeah.
didn't go to journalism school. And so I actually went to school for criminal justice, criminology, and then my minor was forensic psychology. And so I went through all this school. I did summer school. I was trying to get out of school as quickly as possible. And I had this side hobby of politics and law and just being very interested in those things. And I remember my college professor called me into office hours, which I thought was kind of weird at the time. And I was like, okay, this is strange. And he said, I really think you should go to law school. And I said, I don't know, man. I'm trying to finish early. Like I'm trying to finish in 3.5 years instead of 4. And the last thing I want to think about right now is going through more school. And he said, you're really good at making an argument. And, I just really think that you should think about it. And I never did it. I never took him up on that because I didn't want to go into debt going to school to become a lawyer. But it was just something that I always had in the back of my mind. I always wanted to debate people when it came to law and politics and things of that nature. I was the nerd on my college campus who was handing out homemade flyers about, not voting for John Kerry. So I just have always been interested in it. And then it ended up, I started blogging for redstate.com. Back in 2015, I was one of their front page editors. And then when the opportunity presented itself, I moved over to Blaze as a reporter. And then I told them, hey, if there's something on camera that comes available, I would love to be considered for it because I prefer communicating verbally. And it did. And so they asked me if I, wanted to host the show. And I said, sure. At the time, it was The News and Why It Matters. And we did that for about 6 years and it was a lot of fun. And so here I am now. We've transitioned into Sara Gonzales Unfiltered. And that's just kind of where I got my start. I was always interested in it. It was always kind of a hobby of mine. And I turned it into a job.
Wow, I didn't know about the law school potential and all that stuff. That's awesome. I remember when you
Yeah.
asked me to be on your show when I did all of the abortion doula stuff here in
Yeah.
Iowa, and I remember being so nervous because I had only ever done my dad's stuff, and when you do
Yeah.
your own father's show, it doesn't feel real sometimes. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
It just
Yeah. Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
kind of like you're having a conversation with your dad. And
Right.
so I remember waiting for the call to begin, and I was just panicking sitting here. I was so nervous because I was like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot mess up. I cannot sound dumb." You know
You
what
did
I'm
great
saying?
though, by the
Thank
way.
you.
You did
Thank you.
great. And it was great work that you did getting
Thank
all
you.
of that, undercover. So.
Thank you. And so you talked a little bit about, college and all of that. So before that and growing up, have you always had, conservative views? Did you grow up in a conservative family?
I did. I was fortunate enough. I'm sure you can relate. I was fortunate enough to just have a conservative family teach me these values, instill these values in me. And so I never had this, come to Jesus moment or this moment where I was at a crossroads and I couldn't figure out which way I was going to go. I was raised in a conservative household. Now, I will say I am much more political than my parents. I am much more in your face, if you would say, than my parents. But that's just a personality, difference. So they taught me from a very young age how to manage money, They taught me from a very young age, about taxes and things like that. And so, which I'm now trying to instill in my children, because I do think that it was a very important lesson that I learned, that, you can't just spend, spend, spend. You have to watch your money.
Mhm.
How much money do you have? Do you really need that little trinket at the store, or can you wait? Do you want to save up for something more? And my son is like, "Oh, am I going to get a car when I'm 16?" And I'm like, I don't know. How much money do you have saved? So I was fortunate enough that I did grow up with those values that I can now carry on to my children. It was never like a realization for me, which was nice.
And speaking of your kiddos, so how many kids do you have and how old are they?
Yeah, so I have two boys. One is 12 and one is 4.
So what is one of the so obviously I'm a new mom, a very new
Yeah.
mom. Autumn is going to be 1 on March 8th. And which is already crazy because time
It's
moves
coming
super
up.
fast. I know, I know.
Wow.
It moves too fast. I don't even know how she's already won it. It feels like just the other day she was just laying there and I was like, what am
Yep.
I supposed to do with you? They just
Yep.
lay there.
Yep.
And so, I've found it harder to listen and watch certain things now that I'm a mom that used to like not really bother me. Even talking about the abortion doula stuff.
Mhm.
Back then I was like, I am fighting this good fight and it's all right. And now that I have a baby, I look over and I'm like, no, this is crushing me because I'm looking at you and I don't know how people can do this. And so, what is one of the hardest parts for you about being a mom, but also, being kind of on the front lines of such a huge fight?
Yeah, I'll tell you. And I don't know how many of your listeners will buy into this, and that's okay. They don't have to. I know what we've experienced. I will say that every time that I have exposed one of the drag shows for children, one of the all ages drag shows that we've gone into, we've gotten footage of, and we've exposed. We have gone under spiritual attacks. It has been my younger son is usually what happens. That's usually who they go after. And it started from when he was very, very itty bitty. And what happened the first time that we really realized what was happening, because he had had some issues where he would wake up screaming bloody murder, like he
Mm,
was terrified of something, right? But he was so little, he couldn't verbalize what it was. And so
mhm,
finally, he was about maybe 1.5 or 2. And again, it always aligned with when I was exposing one of these places. And so I asked him, what's wrong? And he said, there's a man, and he has a nightlight. He said, there's a man in my nightlight. And I said, is he a mean man or a nice man? Or, tell me about this man. And he said, he's making a mean face. And then it turned out that he explained to me in his, of course, this is like 1.5-year-old toddler,
mhm.
verbiage. So
Yeah,
he's not telling me in complete sentences,
yeah.
but he's telling me. And he said, he hurts me. He pushes on my chest and he hurts me. And it was at that moment that I finally realized, looking back in hindsight, I was aligning. Holy cow, this was happening prior to me hearing him say it, but he wasn't old
Mm,
enough to get the words out. And so we do have a spiritual advisor now who is helping us navigate through, these particular exposés whenever we're going into all of these LGBT, shows for children. But it has been a really difficult thing to face because, I've prayed so much about it, and I've said, God, I just, should I be doing this? Because
mhm.
it's affecting my family. I mean, my little boy didn't ask for this. He's a little boy and he's innocent and they're going after him. And maybe I should just stop. Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe I shouldn't. And then I'm like, no, because that's what the enemy wants me to do. That's what the enemy wants me to think. He wants me to give up. He wants me to stop doing it because he like this is exactly by design, and so we're not going to stop. And I think that that's been, aside the show aside, because the show is the show, but just in the all of the work that I do, that has been the biggest hurdle for me, is just we're dealing with really, really evil demonic stuff right now. And exposing it has really, my family has paid a little bit of a price for it. And that's, I think, been the biggest difficulty in, I mean, you're talking about abortion and stuff like that. I mean, it's just really dark stuff that we're up against. And the more you start exposing it, I think the more upset the devil gets, the enemy gets. And I've felt that personally in my life. So it was difficult. But I mean, we've got it under control now. So everything's okay, but it is something that we're constantly,
Mhm.
playing offense for.
And I think that's one of the hardest parts about even now. I mean, I remember being in high school, not so long ago, but long ago for me. But I remember being in high school and just, these types of things, like even, stupid, like LGBT stuff and abortion, it was still very risque, like nobody really talked about it. Even saying gay in public was like kind of weird.
Yeah.
And now it's so scary because it is so exposed, and you watch these videos where, people are still out there trying to, explain, when babies, just using the abortion stuff as an example, like when how babies are made and when, the conception comes into place and all of that. And people are like, I know, and I just don't care. Like you see more
Mhm.
of that now is like even 10 years ago when I was in high school, a lot of people didn't know or maybe
Yeah.
pretended to not know. But now it's like, I know and I don't care. And that's almost even scarier and,
Yeah.
and almost shows like the evil more, and it's scarier when it comes to the light and people just don't care. I feel like that makes it 10 times scarier.
Yeah, I agree. Or, I mean, I would add to that too, not even don't care, but just lean into it, right?
Mm.
Like I've seen TikTok videos of women who make themselves, abortion cakes, and they're
Yep.
making jokes about it on their social media pages about how, haha, I just got an abortion. And it's just like, listen, I'm obviously as pro-life as it gets, but there is something to be said for the women who knew that it was wrong, but knew that they wanted to keep it a secret because just didn't feel like they had another option. Bragging about it on social media takes it to a whole new demonic level. And that's where we find ourselves in 2025.
And even with a lot of the transgenderism stuff that you do, and that's obviously on the rise with all of the women's sports stuff and all of the bills. And here in Iowa there's a bill happening where they're trying to make it so drag queen story hours can't be for kids and they would be fined and all of that. And that Iowa Capitol just erupted with grown adults screaming and like crying and bawling and yelling because, and the bill really is a focus on minors. You just really can't bring it
Mhm.
around kids or else you'll get fined. And that's the craziest stuff because it's like, why don't you guys go somewhere else? Why don't you guys go do
Mhm.
something else? Go be with your adults. I still
Yep.
don't agree with it, but at least you're doing whatever adults want to do. It's your sin. Like, why are you pushing this, on children? And so my next question for you that I had was that you've exposed obviously a lot of evil that's come with this stuff, just how I was talking about the people at the Capitol screaming and crying because
Yeah.
they can't, whip it and do crazy crap with kids,
Yeah.
and so why do you think children are the number one target? Because I feel like that's what we hear a lot, even with women's
Mhm.
sports. Like, yes, grown women's sports are under attack, but there was just that video on X at a high school where this 6 foot high schooler dude was dunking on these chicks. It reminded me of that Daily Wire comedy video movie that they came out with. You remember that, where it was like
Yeah.
all the grown men doing that? Why do you think children are really the center and the number one target of this fight?
Yeah, I think that it's really simple when you look at it from their perspective, from their lens, and it's that you have to indoctrinate the youth in order to normalize it. These people are not normal, but they want to be so badly, and they want to pretend, they've been pretending for a very long time that what they are doing is normal and they are trying to normalize it. But the quickest way to do that is to indoctrinate the next generation into thinking that it's normal, and then it's going to be totally normal. So that's why you see them targeting children at schools. That's why you see them targeting, children sometimes in my latest work at churches. That's why you see them really targeting the youth. And I mean, that's been, when you look at communism, when you look at Marxism, I mean, that's kind of been the playbook, is like you have to indoctrinate the youth because that is the key to changing an entire generation. And when you change the entire generation, I mean, we're looking at a generation growing up now that, God bless Chloe Cole and the rest of the detransitioners, but we're looking at an entire generation that has been lied to, that has been sterilized, that has had healthy body parts chopped off because they've been given bad medical advice, and they've had doctors push them, rush them into things that they weren't ready for. And so you see them doing that to an entire generation of young people, and it really hits home that wow, they are really trying to normalize this, because if you can just get one generation, all the generations after that will follow. Now, unfortunately for them, it's so crazy. It's so radical. It was just never going to work for them in the first place. And so you see this detransition or, phase popping up because people are saying, hold on, I wasn't ready for this and you pushed me into it. But that was the intention, right? The intention was, we want to normalize this. This is the quickest way to do it, is to target the youth, because the youth don't know any better.
Mm. And like I said, even 10 years ago, when I was a freshman in high school and I did a lot of theater here in town. So for the people who are like, you were homeschooled, you don't know anything. I do know things because I did things with public school kids. So I do know
Yeah.
things. Even back then, it really wasn't even that big of a deal. I remember having these types of conversations about abortion or even, transgenderism, because that was a huge thing in theater. I remember having these conversations with my peers, in my car. I drive them home. And it was just kind of, we didn't agree, but it was okay. Okay, good night. See
Yeah.
you tomorrow for rehearsal. And now, none of those people talk to me. I don't talk to them because it's so, you don't think that children should get these surgeries? Okay, we're done. Or you don't think children should just accept who they are? And I even had somebody on to talk about, so an episode that will already be out when I put this one out is I had one of my only theater friends who actually is a liberal on to discuss some of these topics. And I didn't want it to be argumentative. I didn't want it to be a debate. I just wanted her to lay out what she thought and why she thought it. And because I thought it would be really interesting for people to know her thoughts without it becoming emotional, because we struggle to do that, is to hear what
Yeah.
other people think without it becoming, and my second cousin on my mom's side had and it becomes a whole thing. And,
Right.
I asked her point blank. I said, do you think that, being transgender is a mental disorder like gender dysmorphia? That was what it was known for the longest time. And she said, yes. And I said, okay, wow, one, wow, okay. Two, I was like, okay, we're going there, okay. But two, I said, so you would consider that a mental disorder along with like depression, anxiety, bipolar? And she said, yes. And I said, wow, again, okay. And then I said, so why is it then when you go to a therapist, and
Yep.
they say you're depressed, it's not,
Yep.
okay, now you need to just embrace your depression and live with it.
Yep.
Why do they go to you and say, let's figure out why you're depressed so we can help eradicate it? Same with anxiety, same with being bipolar. And so I asked her, I said, so why then do you think along these lines, it's not, done like it is with depression, anxiety, and bipolar? And she just didn't have an answer, because I think it just becomes like, I don't know, but it makes
Mhm.
me realize what you said. The indoctrination is so strong that it just doesn't even matter. Like, it doesn't even matter that you don't have an answer. It's just because that is the answer. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. 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 No, I agree. Yeah, because, well, they've heard the same mantras repeated over and over,
Hmm.
and they're just repeating the same mantras. But, the unfortunate part of all of this is that the people like me, who are actually standing up and fighting against this, I'm not doing it for my own personal benefit. There's no like personal benefit in standing up against the
Hmm.
mob and saying, hey, you guys are wrong, right? And so I get called a transphobe a lot. I get called anti-trans, all these. And my response to them is just, actually, I care about these people a lot more than those of you do who are pushing them into this lifestyle. You guys are making them more prone to, embracing delusions. You guys are making them more prone to depression, to anxiety, to suicidal
Hmm.
ideation. I mean, you guys are pushing them into that. I'm the one who's saying, hey, we should actually help these people the way that, as you're mentioning, the way that we help them when they have depression, when they have anxiety, when they have, say, alcoholism. When someone has alcoholism, they're an alcoholic. You don't say, hey, you should just drink more. Actually,
Yeah.
you should just embrace drinking. You should just
Yeah.
drink all the time, right? Don't change you. Don't change your behavior. Let the world cater to you. I mean, this is not anything that any psychologist, psychiatrist, any mental health professional would tell you. Embrace your delusion, embrace your mental illness. No mental health professional tells you that, except when it comes to the topic of transgenderism and, as you point out, gender dysphoria. And so it really, it bothers me when people say stuff like that because I'm like, actually, I'm fighting against the grain to save these people before it's too late, before they chop off healthy body parts, before they sterilize themselves, before they are, not they do something that they regret later. It's irreversible, and they can't grow up to be a normal functioning human being, have a baby, in the case that it is a
Mhm.
biological woman, have a baby and then breastfeed their own baby. I know the joys of these things. I've gone through the joys of these things. And I hate thinking that a biological woman would not be able to do that because some doctor pushed them into some procedure that they weren't ready for. And so, as much as they call me anti-trans, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I'm fighting for these people much harder than those of you who
Yeah.
are trying to push them into this lifestyle.
And so you touched on it on a little bit, people calling you anti-trans and like coming for you because of, what you're fighting for. And so how do you handle, hate that comes your way? Because I think one of the main reasons, because I could have entitled this, like, let's talk just about being a conservative woman, or let's talk to Sara
Sure.
Gonzales or whatever. But I wanted to, specify being a mom because you see a lot of moms on the rise, but there's also a lot of moms, that don't want to be on the rise, but feel like they have to now, that are seeing that more, even with their doctors. When I gave birth to Autumn, our doctor, came in, do you want to get her vaccinated today? I said no. The next time, do you want to get her vaccinated? I said no. The next time she said, okay, well, if you don't do all of them by one, then you're gone and you can't come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then it forces me as a young mom, I was only 23, as a young mom, to say, okay, I guess I have to sit here and have this fight with you, I guess, even though you're supposed to be a doctor. So just as an example, but so how do you handle, that hate towards your family as you're standing up for what's right?
I mean, look, you just have to let it be water off a duck's back. You just have to. There's no other option for me. I've never viewed it as anything other than I just can't be bothered with the opinions from strangers. I just
Mm,
can't, because what I know to be true is that I am not only fighting for, my children, because my ultimate goal is, at the end of the day, regardless of what any stranger has to say to me, I want to be able to look my children in the face, in the eyes, and tell them I did every single thing that I could to make this country a better place for you to live in and for you to grow up in. And if I can't do that, then I'm not doing my job. And so I just look at that as, this is my goal. This is my job. I have tunnel vision right now. This is what I'm doing. And if anyone has a problem with that, that's their own personal problem to deal with. All I know is that I am beholden to my children and my family and nobody else. And I can't be bothered with the opinions of others. And that's just, I think, how you have to live when you're doing work like this. You just can't be concerned with other people's opinions. I mean, I've gotten death threats, I can't tell you how many times. And it's like, well, I mean, I wouldn't recommend showing up here. I've got a big, you can't see this off camera. I got a big Liberty safe over here. Okay. I'm locked and loaded. I'm ready to go. And like, I don't recommend that you try this. So, I mean, you just have to get into a spot where you're like, I cannot be concerned with the opinions of others. What I am concerned about is making sure that I do everything I can for my children so that they can grow up in a better place. And that's just what I'm here to do.
And so this is kind of a double question. So how much do your children, know and understand what you do? And also, how do you navigate these conversations with them?
Mhm.
Obviously you're not like, mom's going off to, fight the tranny
Right.
fight. Obviously, your kids are way too young. So how do you navigate those conversations with them?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And it's something that, as my 12-year-old has gotten, he's like almost to the age where I feel like I can share a little bit more with him. So we're just kind of creeping onto
Mhm.
that. But I mostly, I mean, my 4-year-old, it's easy because it's like, mommy's got to go to work. I'll be back soon. But my
Mhm.
12-year-old, it's more of a conversation about, well, what are you doing? Well, where are you going? Well, what's the work that you're doing? And I just tell him, I have a job where I work really hard to protect children and keep children innocent for as long as possible, because there are people in this country and in this state who want to jeopardize, your innocence, and, don't want to protect you. And so I just have to work to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so far, he's been satisfied with that answer. I will say that before I do homeschool him, but before I started homeschooling him, he went to a private Christian school, and that private Christian school did teach them. It was actually, I didn't mind it. It was a very broad concept of the devil is at work and the devil has tricked people into thinking that boys can be girls and girls can be boys. And, we know that's not true. But unfortunately, he has been able to convince a certain, subsect of society that that is true. And so, unfortunately, they're confused and, we'll pray for them. But so I have been able to talk to him a little bit about, like, hey, unfortunately, that's how some people think. The world has put that on them, and we really have to make sure that we work really hard so that they know the truth about themselves,
Mm.
because that's going to set them free. And so I've been able to have those kind of broader conversations with them. But they do know that, whenever mommy does go to work, it is for them. And, that is a hard one because I will say I try to solicit help here. Because a lot of what I do is going inside undercover to things. And unfortunately, here in the state, I've kind of earned myself a reputation. And so I'm like public enemy number one to all the drag queens. So much so that at some venues, they like have a list and pictures. And so they'll stop me at the door and they'll like not let me in. And so I've asked people, hey, if you want to volunteer, please let me know if you can come and be at this, because if I get kicked out, I need someone on the inside filming this
Mm.
so we can get it out to the public. And there are a lot of people who are like, oh, well, I have kids. I have kids. I got to be at home. I have kids. And I'm like, I do too. But
Yeah.
I'm doing this for them, like this is for them. This is the whole reason that I'm doing it, is because I have kids. So sometimes that's frustrating to hear. But yeah, I try to explain them on a much more broad perspective of just mommy's working really hard to protect kids like you. And it's worked so far. I haven't gotten any further questions. So I'm just going to kind of ride
Let
that
that
out
go. Yeah. Yeah.
until I
Let
get
that go.
more.
Yeah, let that go. That's like when they're younger and they're like, "So, how was I born?"
Yeah.
"Oh, oh." My dad would just kind of be like, "What did you say?" So he had more time. He would just repeat the question. That's usually what he would do when I was younger and he didn't want to answer. And so when you go to these, events, so you talked about, you've been posting stuff recently about, kind of uncovering stuff within a church, and I've seen you go to 1,000 other, events regarding this stuff. Is the attack on children blatant? Is it a part of the rhetoric, or do they try to hide it? Like, how does that, work when it comes to kids?
Yeah, it's interesting. Most of the time, it's just right out in the open. And what I find is that the drag queens blame the parents. They're very quick to say, well, it's not our fault that parents are bringing their kids to something like this. But what I find to be so interesting is that almost every single time that I go to one of these all ages shows, or a show where they just don't specify, hey, this should be 18 and up because it's totally raunchy and you shouldn't be bringing your young children
Mhm.
to this. The parents may be bringing them. That is true. But there's blame to be shared because the drag queens also openly invite the children up on stage. They have a conversation with them. They point them out. I mean, they are the ones who are actually targeting the kids that are in the audience once they are in the audience. So saying the parents are the ones who bring them only goes so far, because if you have any semblance of modesty or, self-respect, you would feel actually a little bit embarrassed that a child was there, right? Like you wouldn't want to bring attention to the fact that there was a child in the room. And instead, that's what these drag queens do almost every single time, is say, oh, look, a baby. What's your name? Why are you here? I mean, they're
Mhm.
engaging with these children. So clearly they're not bothered by it. And clearly they don't mind drawing attention to it. So, I mean, obviously there's blame to be shared, but I mean, this is not something that they seem to be embarrassed about, that they seem to want to keep under wraps. They're doing it in broad daylight in front of everyone, which is just like a whole nother issue in and of itself.
And so have you had conversations, or I guess maybe tried to have conversations with the moms that bring their kids to these types of events? I'm sure you have, but is there something that you can kind of tell my audience about, like, what is their reasoning? Why are they doing this?
So a couple of them, I mean, really, I have tried to have conversations with them. It's gotten nowhere. So I've kind of stopped at this point. I've
Yeah.
realized, you know what, I'm better off just recording it and exposing it for what it is. Because a lot of times they will say, inexplicably, they'll say, well, they'll see it at school anyway. And I'm like, what school are you taking your
Mm,
children to
yeah.
that they're going to watch a grown man dressed as a woman, undressing on stage? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. I Listen, I'm a product of public school. It was a long time ago, longer than I'd like to, admit to. But we never really, there was no unit on grown men dressing up as women undressing in front of young children. I miss that unit maybe, right? So they'll say things like, "Oh, they'll find it out in school," or there was one woman who told me at a drag queen Christmas show that I went to that it's no different than a Disney movie. I mean, these women are just they're delusional. Like they're just
Mm,
deluding themselves. They're coming up with any rational thought that they can come up with because from what I've seen is that these are single moms who don't want to pay for a babysitter, don't want to ask someone to watch their child, and they want to come do this thing, and they don't have the discernment to say this isn't right for my child, I'm just not going to go. They don't have the willpower. They just say, "Oh, it's fine, I'll just bring her with me." And that's what they end up doing.
You know, I don't know if you've ever read or watched the Percy Jackson movies. I don't know if your
Mm,
boys are into those. Those were one of my favorite series of books. And these people remind me of this scene in Percy Jackson. They are on this little quest and they go to a casino and it's owned by some of these Greek mythology people and they give
mhm.
them this lotus flower and they eat it. And then they basically just, like lose themselves and don't understand what's going on. And they kind of like lose track of time, but they're all, whimsical and everything's fine. And that's
Yeah,
honest. Every time I watch or see or hear anything about these people, that is my first thought is that they've,
yeah,
drank the Kool-Aid, aka ate the Percy Jackson lotus flower, and they're just like in this state. And
mhm,
sometimes I've watched people kind of wake up out of that. And I just
yeah,
had a friend over here today who she said she was having a conversation with somebody and kept asking them questions, and they finally were like, "What I'm saying doesn't make sense." And she was like, "Yeah, actually, yeah, it doesn't make sense." And it was like, I told her, I'm like, "That's what I'm talking about. That is the
yeah,
Percy Jackson. Like, you've woken up out of this trance where you're like, wait, what year is it? And where am I at? And what am I talking about?" You know what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah.
it's something that I don't and can't comprehend. And I've never been able to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mean, would just bring into the picture because they obviously go hand in hand, like biological men and women's sports. And it's just like, how crazy is it? I mean, the history books must be written in such a way that when our kids are reading them and our kids are reading that we were letting like gigantic 6'4" biological males compete against young women in sports that obviously, strength and muscle mass is a factor. People are going to be like, what were you guys smoking? Why would you have ever allowed that? Why would you have ever put your women at risk like that? I mean, people of the future are really going to be judging our generation very harshly for allowing this in the first place.
That's something I feel like I don't think about as often as I should. The
Yeah.
craziness that's happened because I'm also planning on homeschooling Autumn. And one
Yeah.
day I'm going to have to be like, once upon a time in a land far away, and she's going to be like,
Yeah.
what was going on? Why did this happen? I'm going to be like, I don't know. We suck.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, next
Yeah.
question. Wait, say that again. That's what I'll do. I'll be like, what did you
Yeah.
say? Um, and so this is something that I found, so obviously the title is, being conservative mom. And as these conversations are actually becoming appropriate again, because I've noticed on social media, even people feel like they're actually able to talk and speak up again now that Trump is
Yep.
president. But I actually asked, so I had Jill Savage, also of Blaze TV, on, and I asked her the same question, but I'm going to ask you in the vibe of a mom.
Okay.
How do you explain to other mothers why you voted for Donald Trump? And when I had Jill on, I asked her, how as a woman can you explain that? And even within your, mother circles as a young mom, especially, I feel like it's hard sometimes to when people are like, well, why would you do that for the sake of our kids and you're a woman and you're a mom? So how would you explain that as a mother yourself?
Yeah, it's actually really easy for me. I voted to keep my children safe. I voted for the guy who promised to shut down the border, close down the border, and make sure that there's an orderly, controlled fashion to allowing people into our country and make sure that we know who's coming into our country. I think that that just is obviously going to make us more safe. Someone who said that violent criminals can no longer just roam the streets. You know, you have a previous president who decided that we were not going to prosecute violent criminals, that we were going to go after, I don't know, like parents showing up at school board meetings and Catholics instead. Those were the domestic terrorists. Meanwhile, they're letting violent criminals out on the streets. I could go on and on, but policy after policy after policy of the Democrats, of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, was, of course, to not prosecute actual crime, to make our streets less safe. And I think that even here in the suburbs, the parents, the moms were feeling that. And so it was really that simple for me. I voted to make this country a better place for my sons to grow up in. I voted to make this country a safer place for my sons to grow up in. And quite frankly, I voted for the guy who said, I think inflation is a bad thing. I don't want you to keep paying as much as you're paying at the grocery store and at the gas tank, because as a family of four, we feel that every single time we go there, every single time we fill up the car, because I'm toting the boys around everywhere, every single time we go to the grocery store. And my 12-year-old has gotten to the age where he's like prepubescent, but old enough to like, I'm like, what? How are you going back for thirds? That's like half the fridge that you just ate. I've got to go to the grocery store again, right? Like you're eating me out of house and home. And so I'm feeling these prices too. And so it really is that simple, is we either have a country or we don't. We were on the precipice of losing everything that our country was founded upon and everything that it stood for. And I decided that I love this experiment that we call America and I want to keep doing it. And it really was as simple as that, is that I wanted to keep this country for my sons. And I think that anyone who doesn't recognize that, who is too wrapped up in allowing their young girls the ability to kill their own babies when they get older, something like that, I can't even relate to at this point.
Mm.
And I don't want to say I don't hate those people. I don't wish them ill will. I just can't relate to them at all. I can't imagine even being able to be friends with someone who is on that wavelength, because I am just so involved in just saving this country for my children. And there really was no other option.
It and it comes to a point too with some of these people where there is going to be no happiness, even with some of these, the government's being like, we might send you a lot of your money back, like a lot. And on TikTok, people are like, that's not gonna fix the this, and it's like, what is your complaint? It's money. Just be quiet and take it. We're giving you
Yes.
money. It's like
Yeah.
Oprah. You get money. You get money. You get money. You get money. And they're like, well, according to, I'm like, you guys don't know anything. You don't even know what you're
Yeah.
talking about. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And they're like, that won't help the inflation. I'm like, I thought there wasn't inflation. I thought you said there wasn't. What are you talking about now? Oh my gosh, it's so frustrating.
I
And
know.
so it just doesn't make sense. It's like, it gets to a point where, and I was just talking about this too, that there is no coming to an agreement. There's just is none, And so I was just
Yeah.
talking about those like Jubilee videos that they do where there's like 25 people in a circle and then like one of us in the middle or one of
Mhm.
them in the middle. And, those are kind of fun and entertaining. But at the end of the day, I just kind of find them pointless personally, because it gets to a point where it's like, you're not going to change their mind.
Yep.
They're not going to change your mind. And so it's kind of like, why can't we be out there actually doing stuff? Like, why are we sitting in this room having this stupid conversation? Because everybody in the comments already has also made up their mind. It's like,
Yep.
now that we're here and in this space, I feel like we should be in the business of helping people find Jesus, because that's genuinely the only way to get people's, hearts and minds changed. Because like
Yeah.
I talked earlier, a lot of these people know what they're doing and they just don't care, or they embrace it, like you said. And so it gets to a point where it's like, yeah, these videos can be like kind of funny, or these little clips and stuff, or and obviously, but it's like sometimes, especially the ones that are geared towards, my generation, Gen Z and all that. It's kind of like a lot of us have already made up our minds, so it's really not gonna change. Maybe you disagree. That's what I think about those videos.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this though. I agree with you. But I would also like to just remind everyone that we are the majority right now, right? There was a mandate in this country, and for as much as the left likes to dig their heels in, it turns out that there's not as many of them as there are of us who still believe in common sense, who still, believe in God, who still believe in the founding principles upon which this country was founded, who still believe in, right and wrong and law and order. And so I want people to not be discouraged that, you're not ever going to be able to convince the left, because the left doesn't come to their conclusion by way of logic. That, like, they're not a logical people. And so you're not going to convince them logically, because that's just not how they think. They are an emotional people. They come to all of their conclusions based on emotion. So that's typically generally not how the right conservatives think. That's certainly not
Mm-hmm.
how I think. I mean, I'm very analytical. It's not emotional for me. It's like, it's the same thing with, the topic of illegal immigration. It's like, yeah, it'd be great if we could open our doors for everyone who's in search of a better life, but unfortunately that's not how real life works, and we just can't do that. So that's really sad that other people were not born in this country, and I feel bad for them, but at the same time, you can't have a country run like that, right? But the left is like, oh, but we have to have compassion. We have to let these people in. What about the fact that there's women and children in search of a better life? I mean, they just are not capable of thinking rationally and logically about something. So you do have to come to a certain point where you're like, I'm not going to convince you because I'm using logic and you're using
Mm-hmm.
emotion, and those two things are not going to communicate with each other. But it's okay, because it turns out that, at least for now, the majority of us here in America have decided that we are going to govern based off of logic again.
So in 2025, I feel like there are a lot of moms. Obviously, like Moms for Liberty is a huge thing. There are a lot of moms, standing up and speaking out. But like I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are a lot of moms who are not, or
Yeah.
who are just now getting into the space, especially because of, the health and safety of their children when it comes to vaccination. So they may not have been on Team Trump, but now that he's in and all of the RFK stuff, they're like, okay, I'm kind of now starting to get more into it. What is your advice to them, specifically, younger moms, maybe in their 20s like me, who are now finally getting into this space where they're like, okay, I want to speak up, I want to learn more, I want to do more?
Yeah, there are so many more out there of you than you realize. And I really think that you should take heart in that, because the more of you guys that speak out, I mean, think about it. The way that the reason that we got to the place that we were at, where America felt comfortable saying, yeah, it's fine that the government shuts us down. Yeah, it's fine that we're not going to go to work. It's totally fine that they're going to suffocate us with face diapers that don't work. And it's totally fine that we have to all stand 6 feet apart, and they're going to totally, like, engage in tyranny over our entire lives. They're going to force an injection into us. The reason that we got to that place was because there were too many people who were afraid to speak up. And so now the tide has turned. I think that people have realized, in hindsight, I mean, let's be honest, I was never like that. I'm sure you were never like that, okay? But there are a lot of people who were, because the culture is the culture, and the left
Mm.
has taken, they for so long have had such a hold on the culture. And now this is shifting. And so the way that we shift the culture back is to remind everyone that we are the majority here. We are, I mean, for so long we were the silent majority. We don't need to be silent anymore. We don't need to. There was a mandate back in November of 2024 where we all agreed. Donald Trump said, I'm going to cut government. I'm going to close the borders. I'm going to put RFK in charge of Health and Human Services so he can root out why our children are so sick. Maybe it's the vaccines. Maybe it's the food. Maybe it's the fluoride in the water. Maybe it's a combination of all of these things. But we're going to find out why our children are sick, because something is very wrong. I'm going to put Elon Musk in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency, right? I mean, he said he was going to do all of these things, and the American people voted for it, and we won. And so I want everyone to be heartened by that. I want all of these young moms to be heartened by that. There is a reason why there were so many minorities, so many suburban women who overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump rather than, again, another woman, a fellow woman,
Mhm.
Kamala Harris. There was a reason why they did that. And it's because, in part, they want a better country and a better future for their children. And so whether that's because RFK is going to be in charge, and, you have these young moms who are hesitant about vaccines, who are skeptical about vaccines. Trust me, I know I don't vaccinate my children at all. And I will proudly and happily tell people that. And I will happily explain to them why. And I'm happy to go into the details on that. But I just think that parents, moms need to not feel scared anymore to tell, especially even the medical experts, the doctors themselves. I said no. I don't want to. I'm comfortable in my decision. I'm confident in it. And
Mm.
if you don't want to treat my child, if you don't, I'll find someone who will. And I guarantee you guys, you will find someone who will, because there are enough doctors out there who have seen the writing on the wall, who have lived through COVID. Maybe it was COVID that that was their awakening. But there are enough doctors out there who have seen the writing on the wall, and you're not crazy. And we just all need to speak up. Maybe it's not as loud as I am, and that's okay. I'm a big loudmouth. Not everyone is going to be like me, but no one needs to be scared to say these things, because we're living at a time where everyone is aware that something is very, very wrong. And it's okay to speak up. I mean, we're in the majority now.
So before I let you go, I have to ask, because you have been to all of these crazy things, crazy events. What is the or one of the craziest things you've witnessed at one of these events you've been to?
Well, it's gross. Are you sure you want me to tell you? I mean, I won't be explicit about it.
You know what? Go for it. Go for it. Will
Okay.
it get me views? Will it get me views? Do it. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you
Can
if
I
you
clip
have
this
a
part? Yeah.
yeah. If you have like an image of what I actually saw, because it's documented out there somewhere.
And I'll go.
So we went to yeah, we went to it was a gay pride festival in Arlington last year, Arlington, Texas. And it was very, very clearly billed as all ages, kid friendly, family friendly. In fact, it was so family friendly, they said that children got in free. Young children got in free because they wanted people to feel very, very, empowered to bring their young children. And so I was going through all of the vendor booths, because all of these outdoor festivals have, like a sound stage and booths as you're
Mm-hmm.
walking through. And I kid you not, there was literally a booth with just dildos.
Oh my
It was
gosh.
just a whole bunch. There was like a rainbow one and a black one and a white one for diversity, I guess. And it
Mm.
was just
DEI, of
right,
course.
yeah, and it was just right in the line where children were walking back and forth. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I want to vomit and I want to punch someone and I want to scream all at the same time, that you guys are doing this right in front of there are children walking past this booth, and none of the parents seemed at all concerned by it. They weren't like shielding their children's eyes or anything like that. Everyone was just laughing, having a good time. And I mean, I have been in some really, really gross situations, but it was that one in particular that I was just like, I am living in the twilight zone right now. I don't know how I unsee this. And I took like 5 showers that night. When I got home, I was just like, this is so gross. I need to get it off of me. But I mean, you got to be a sick person to know that there are children that are going to be at this event that's being billed as family friendly, and be like, you know what, I'm going to sell at my vendor booth dildos.
Especially letting them in for free, knowing that people are going to be more encouraged to bring their children because it's free,
Yep.
and
Yep.
selling that stuff. And it's bizarre, and I didn't even realize it until later, but like after I stopped doing a lot of the stuff with the theater people here, just like the conversation, and especially with adults, I had like adult men discussing their like gay relationships with me, and I was like 15 years old, and their
Yeah.
discussion about meeting people on dating sites and hooking up. And it's just, we need more moms, especially because they're, like the maternal ones, but they're also the ones that are at the end of the day, like looking out for their kids, because they are the ones who grew them for 9 months. They're the ones who held
Yep.
them, in their arms, and breastfeed, like you said, and connect with them and spend their days with them, while husbands are out, providing for their families and working hard for their families. We are the ones who spend those days with the kids, or, spend those long nights when they're sick and wake up in the middle of the night, like we were talking about before we started. And so your advice and your encouragement will be received, and I just so greatly appreciate you being on and like taking the time to do this and encourage other moms who might be thinking, especially like you said, oh, I have kids, oh, I don't have the time, like, but you're doing this for your kids. You're
Mhm.
not spending time away from them to spend time away. You're spending time away from them for them, and to
Mhm.
invest in their future. And that's so encouraging, and I literally appreciate you doing this so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I hope that young moms are encouraged. I mean, we're all in this together, right? And it's really, really hard as you navigate motherhood to find, moms um who share your values. And so once you do, hold on to that community and, share your story and hold on to your truths and your morals as hard as you can, because we only get one chance at this, right? I mean, this is motherhood. We only get one chance. We can't screw it up. It's really important.
So tell people where they can follow you, where they can keep an eye on what you're doing, etc.
Yeah, sure. They can go to, we do the show, Sara Gonzales Unfiltered, on YouTube at Sara Gonzales Unfiltered. And then I'm all over social media. It's at Sara Gonzales TX. You can find me on X and Instagram and Facebook and all that fun stuff at that same handle.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And that was Let's Talk episode 13. Let's talk about being a conservative mom.